Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned when you're doing your researching for these upcoming MMA events. There is no UFC this weekend, but there is a ton of other great MMA action going on throughout the world, and how I'm able to stay up to date and research every single competitor fighting on these cards is with the MMA Fight Archive. Direct links to past fights for pretty much every single fighter on all of these cards, and direct links to their Tapology page, Instagram page, stats pages, all of that good stuff. Make sure you check it out with a 7-day free trial. Link for that is in the description below. And again, I've used this to research this card I'm about to break down for you guys, as well as the other 3 regional events I'll be breaking down strictly on my Lock of the Night Patreon page in written form. But we are due for a regional bonus MMA Lockcast breakdown for April, and I'll be doing that for one of the 2 cards on that go down on Saturday, either the Octagon card or Cage Warriors. But I need your help in regards to figuring out which one you guys would like to hear about. Drop a comment below. Let me know whether you guys would want a Cage Warriors breakdown or an Octagon breakdown. I'll drop that for you guys on Friday, probably late afternoon, evening-ish, as early in the evening as possible, because both those cards will be going down Saturday afternoon. But I will drop them on Friday. Which of the 2 do you guys want, though? Let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, you guys can find written breakdowns for ACA, Cage Warriors, and Octagon on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. All right. We got the welterweights and featherweights kicking off the PFL regular season, or at least for their divisions, tomorrow night for the PFL 3rd 2024 regular season event. Great card up and down. I love the mix of PFL and Bellator talent that we have here. A lot of intriguing matchups. A lot of questions will be answered in terms of the legitimacy of some fighters that are undefeated coming into this card, or at least have some question marks in terms of the level of competition they've been going up against in the past. So I was very excited to break this card down and see which fights that we could really hone in on and try to, extract some value out of, or even just decide, hey, we don't have any value on this fight at all. Nothing to really attack or try to take advantage of. So let's just pass and go on to the other 11 fights that we have on the card. And right off the bat, I am a little bit hesitant in regard to one of the fights that is potentially canceled. Right now we have Laureano Staropoli, who has not weighed in, at least from nothing that I've been able to see from all the investigating that I've been doing with Instagram pages and all that stuff. Even the PFL Twitter page did not post any weigh-in picture of Murad Ramazanov or Laureano Staropoli, which leads me to believe that fight is potentially canceled here. If you guys remember, Staropoli has had issues in the past in terms of making weight at 170 pounds. He was forced to go up to 185 pounds, which ended his UFC career. Then he went back down to 170 for his last couple of fights, if I'm not mistaken, but still clearly having issues making the weight here. So I'll just kick right off the bat, minus 525 on Ramazanov. He's pretty much a grapple heavy fighter, very strong, can go for takedowns, drag opponents to the ground. Even when they're able to kind of stuff the takedown by digging an underhook during the attempt, Ramazanov is so strong that he can still manage to clasp his hands behind his opponents and drive through with the takedown to still get his opponents down. Staropoli may have a little bit of a striking advantage, but I think he's going to struggle in terms of keeping Ramazanov off of him. And I think Ramazanov grinds this fight out and wins a decision. Again, just a quick breakdown for you guys there, as I don't think this fight is actually happening. But in case you guys were wondering what my thoughts were, Ramazanov likely would have cruised in that matchup regardless. All right, let's get into the fights that I know for sure are happening. Starting off with the first fight of the night between Romain Debienne, who comes in at plus 255. He goes up against Thad Jean, who comes in at minus 305. Now, Debienne is a power puncher who throws in solid combinations, and he's been able to pull off upset victories in his last 2 matchups for Bellator, as he's gone out and knocked out both of his opponents. I believe one of them in the first round and one of them in the second round, showcasing that he has some good power and showcasing he is not the fighter that started his pro career 1-3. Since that run, he is now 9-1 with his lone defeat coming against a very talented prospect who's escaping my mind at the moment right now. But still, we need to worry about the power of Debienne. However, his opponent, That Gene, is one of my favorite prospects on the regional scene right now, or at least the PFL scene, I guess we can call it. Long, lanky, has a sniper-like striking approach where he utilizes a lot of power to hurt his opponents down the pipe, and when he smells blood, he runs after it, and he's usually able to get the finish. When he is taken down, he does a great job in terms of immediately working back to his feet and then getting back to his handiwork. I expect him to really touch up Debienne here. He needs to mind his P's and Q's, but I do think eventually he'll be able to find that big shot to put Debienne out when Debienne tries to crash the pocket and get off on his range. He's going to have to be in that no man's land a lot to try to get some success off on Gene, but I think Gene will have the speed, power, and accuracy advantage here, which will allow him to land the big shots and eventually put Debienne cleat out. So I think we see the big favorite kick off the card with the W here as Gene knocks out Debienne. All right, moving on to the next fight, we got Tyler Diamond coming in at plus 150, going up against Otto Rodrigues, a fight between PFL, Bellator guys. But PFL has scarcely used Tyler Diamond since he joined the promotion back in 2021. He's put together a 1-2 record with his losses coming to Movlid Khaybulaev, and the other name is kind of escaping me at this moment in time, but I believe still tough matchups for him. Normally comes from a wrestling background, a Team Alpha Male product as well. Was on the Ultimate Fighter back in 2017, back in Tough 27, lost in his second fight to Jay Cuccinello, and then he actually got a shot on the finale and came up short against Bryce Mitchell. He's been on the regional scene ever since. Seems to be, splitting his time between hunting and fighting, but hasn't been the most active as of late. But he is a guy that has a solid wrestling background. Could be improving his striking a little bit, but he's powerful, he's strong, and usually pretty good in scrambles as well, depending on the level of his opposition. His opponent this weekend, Otto Rodrigues, is another guy that hasn't really had the most activity over the last couple of fights. I believe this will be his third fight since 2017, but it is his second fight since September, so hopefully this is a sign of him starting to get a little bit more active. Last time around, he submitted Brian Moore in the second round of their matchup, showcasing his grapple-heavy approach, his timing on takedowns, getting his opponents to the mat, and then finding that submission from the top position. His striking, similar to Tyler Diamond, still needs a little bit of work, but his grappling has been good enough that he doesn't need to worry about the striking too much. Now, in terms of the odds here, right? Rodrigues minus 175, like I said at the top. I think that this is just kind of just an opening line that people really haven't taken too much action on, thinking that Rodrigues might have the better jiu-jitsu, which will end up being the difference maker here. But I think that the wrestling, at least pure wrestling advantage that Tyler Diamond should hold in this matchup should allow him to kind of dictate where this fight takes place. Now, obviously, there is still some chances that Rodrigues should be able to get his own jiu-jitsu going, which could put Diamond into trouble. But I'm going to lean on Diamond here, as I think that with that wrestling background, I'm hoping that he can, scramble well enough, stay from being off of his back, maybe use his power in the striking arm to try to rattle Rodrigues, and then use his wrestling defensively to keep Rodrigues on the feet and try to have some success there. Great training camp. I think he's definitely motivated to try to snap this 2-fight winning or losing streak that he's currently on, and I think at plus 150 he might be worth a little bit of a shot here. Both guys a little bit flaky, but I think that the dog is definitely worth a shot here considering the stylistic matchup that we have, and not to mention the momentum, I believe, is why the line is currently where it's at. Rodrigues obviously on a winning streak, whereas Diamond's not really looking the greatest as of late, but I do think that stylistically speaking, this is a very winnable matchup for the American Tyler Diamond. So I'll take him to win this fight by decision. Next up, we got Don Madge coming in at minus 175, going up against the ultra-violent Bellator veteran Brendan Ward, who comes in at plus 150. Now, Don Madge was actually scheduled to take on somebody else, and Brendan Ward has stepped into this PFL tournament, and I'm thinking he's more than happy to stay busy enough. But we'll start off on the Don Madge side of things, who only went, I believe, 1-1 in the UFC, but was unable to really get too much action in the UFC. He eventually ended up getting cut, and now is 1-1 in. He was 2-0 in the UFC, I should say, with wins over Tay Edwards and Ferricium, who's a streaking French prospect at this moment in time. But since joining the PFL, he is 1-1. He had a solid victory in his debut But then last time around, he got knocked out by Hausch Manfield, which was almost a year and a half ago, or at least 2 years, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, let me just confirm that number here, but I know it's been a while since we've seen Don Madge in the cage. That was a fight that I thought he was actually winning. I thought he was doing a good job in terms of keeping Hausch Manfield at bay, piecing him up with his Muay Thai striking approach. But then in the third round, Manfield was able to land a big shot to put the lights out for Don Madge. So that was 2 years ago, pretty much 2 years to the date since we've seen Don Madge in action. He's still only 33 years old, and I think that's a capable age for him, especially with the lack of activity he's been having as of late, to still go out there and have some high level performances. He comes from a Muay Thai background. We know he does a great job in terms of sticking that 1-2 down the pipe, utilizing his kicks to stay active. Off of his back, he has a very aggressive BJJ game, so even if opponents look to take him to the ground, we often see him throwing up submissions or looking for reversals or get-ups, and I think he'll be facing some takedown attempts here from Brennan Ward, who does have a wrestling background but is a guy that only knows violence. In his 24 fights, he has only seen the scorecards once. This guy either goes out there and gets the kill, or he ends up going out there and gets finished himself. He's very solid in terms of throwing big power with speed and athleticism early in fights, but we see him start to fall off in terms of productivity and efficiency as fights start getting into the second and third rounds. I think Don Madge will do a good enough job in terms of stifling that forward power pressure that Brendan Ward likes to attack with, and I think that actually might lead Brendan Ward into getting knocked out here by the superior striker. My only concern, and why I won't be taking Don Madge at minus 175, is due to the layoff here. You're talking about 2 years off, and then coming in against a guy that's hyper aggressive like Brendan Ward. You might need a little bit of time to get used to being back in the cage in live action and having a berserker like Brendan Ward trying to crash the pocket against you and getting your timing and your spacing under your feet again. That's going to take him a little bit of adjustment, in my opinion, and I don't think it's worth taking a minus 175 shot on a guy like Madge, who could potentially get knocked out, just as we saw against Hausch Manfield. Ward might be live early here, but I think as we start to get into deeper waters, we'll see what Madge's striking advantage and movement really start to frustrate Ward, and that could potentially open up a finishing opportunity here for Madge. So I'm going to go my official prediction as Madge by knockout. This could potentially go over 1.5 rounds as well, considering Madge's approach, and as long as Ward's durability can hold up early. But I think that we'll see Madge do a good enough job in terms of keeping Ward at bay and then eventually finishing him in the second or third round. Just be wary of the long layoff that he's coming off of. All right, next up, we got Laureano. Well, actually, sorry, I already covered this at the top of the show. We don't know if that fight's happening. The prediction is Ramazanov by decision, but don't put too many eggs in that basket, as again, probably even by the time I'm done doing this recording, they might even announce that it's off. But even if it's not, I got Ramazanov by decision. All right, this one I'm very intrigued about, between Timur Khizriev coming in at minus 325, going up against Brett Johns, who comes in at plus 275. Now, Khizriev, undefeated, 14-0, had some good moments against Justin Gonzales last time around, utilized his grappling efficiently in the first round, and then outstruck him in the second and third rounds, showcasing that he doesn't just need the grappling to be successful. He has an improving striking game, has some good kicks up the middle, has some good fight IQ in terms of which combinations to throw depending on the stance that his opponent is in, but I think he does feel most comfortable when he can get the takedowns. What's impressive is the fact that he doesn't give up on himself when he can't secure takedowns. He just gets back to the striking, gets back to the game plan, and eventually waits for the other opportunity or another opportunity to eventually get the fight back to the ground. But great cardio, great overall game, and I think he does have the chops to be successful in this PFL season, depending on how they continue to match him up moving forward. His opponent this weekend, Brett Johns, obviously had a 5-2 run with the UFC before accepting more money from Bellator after coming off of a victory over Montel Jackson, and then unfortunately hasn't had the greatest run. I believe he went on a pretty mediocre run with Bellator before joining the PFL roster and pulling off a third round victory in the last fight for PFL Europe. But he's a guy we know, relentless, all gas, no breaks type of fighter, really likes to put his opponents into bad positions and kind of just smother them from there. I believe the last opponent that did defeat him was Danny Sabatello, who showcased that, his wrestling was probably going to be superior to John's, and John's really had no answer for that. And that's what kind of makes me hesitant about taking the big plus money on him here, even though I feel like this fight will play closer than the odds actually indicate. I got Khizriev closer to like minus 185, if I'm being honest. And I still can't find myself getting to the betting window in terms of taking the perceived value that I have on Brett Johns in the spot. I think Khizriev is the better striker. So even if they end up going out there and striking, I think we'll see Khizriev land the better damage. And then in the pure wrestling department, I think that we'll see Khizriev's athleticism come into play here, allowing him to stay ahead of Johns in the scrambling situations, but just not adding minus 325 rate. That just gives me a little bit of pause and concern. I'll be passing on this matchup, maybe take a little bit of a shot on Khizriev by decision straight up, as I think it's going to be very difficult for him to finish a guy like Brett Johns. But I see this fight going to the scorecards, and I do like Khizriev to go out there and get the decision victory. All right, next up, we got a striker versus grappler matchup here between Adam Borics, who comes in at minus 150. His opponent, Enrique Barzola, comes in at plus 130. Now, Borics has been an underachiever, in my opinion. He's currently was on a 4-fight winning streak before running into Patricio Pitbull back in 2022, and a couple of mistakes caused him to pretty much give up that entire fight. He was doing some good work from distance with his striking, but for some reason would either jump guillotine or throw a flying technique, and that would allow Patricio to take him to the ground and grind him out for the rest of that the round, pretty much. It didn't make any sense to me as to why Borics was fighting in that manner, as I thought he had the tools to defeat a guy like Pitbull, who needed to be in the pocket to have success. Borics has shown good takedown defense and good work against other fighters like Mads Burnell, who he was able to defeat over 5 rounds in the previous fight. But still, you got to wonder about his fight IQ and his ability to actually defeat guys who are dead set on really taking him to the ground. And that's what he's facing here in Enrique Barzola, who does a great job in terms of putting his opponents on their back and just grinding them out from that top position. He's 2-2, I believe, now in the... he might be actually 3-2 in Bellator right now. He's riding a 2-fight winning streak, but the 2 losses that he had were very close fights in fights against guys like Magomedov and Juan Archuleta. I believe Juan Archuleta sweeped him on the scorecards there, but I think those rounds were much closer than the 30-27 indicated. Not saying that he deserved to win those rounds, but he was very competitive against a former champion like Archuleta. That should give him enough confidence moving forward in his PFL career now. Now, like I said, off the top, this is a striker versus grappler matchup where both guys are going to be looking to implement their styles and see who can come out on top. I'm going to lean Barzola with the underdog price here at plus 130, as I think that his style is going to be very difficult for Borics to deal with. Yes, you had a guy like Mads Burnell who was unable to get his grappling heavy approach off, but Barzola is much more determined in terms of putting his opponents in compromising positions, pushing them up against the cage, dragging them to the ground, and then smashing them from that top position. Borics will clearly be the better striker in this matchup, and that doesn't give me too much pauses. I think that Barzola has historically shown a very granite chin, which will allow him to go out there, eat some shots, but still close the distance, get his hands around Borics, push him up against the cage, and drag him to the ground. I would also like to see Barzola lean on his calf kicking game that he showcased a little bit earlier in his career to maybe open up those takedown entries that he could get in on the hips of Borics, take him to the ground, and grind him out. But at plus 130, I love taking underdog shots on guys that show this type of skill and this type of game plan of grinding opponents out and having the cardio to do so. And I think I see a path to victory here for Barzola. So give me Barzola and Barzola by decision. All right, next up, we got Bubba Jenkins coming in at minus 150, going up against Kai Kamaka coming in at plus 130. Now, Bubba Jenkins, last time around, got defeated by Jesus Pinedo and was actually scheduled to fight Chris Wade in a showcase bout, another fight. I think it was the third fight against Chris Wade. But Wade missed weight. Bubba Jenkins refused to fight, so he ended up sitting on the sidelines for that year-end card for PFL last year. And now he enters this season hoping to get back to a championship which is something that he's been so close to in the past. I believe he actually won it in the past too, if I'm not mistaken. But last time around, very tough fight for him against Jesus Pinedo, who was able to keep that fight upright and then eventually find the finish over Bubba. But Bubba, we know all about him. High-level wrestling background, seems to slow down later on in fights unless he's able to establish that top position and utilize that position to catch his breath so that he can continue to do that for the rest of the fight. His striking is a lot of power striking stuff so that he can eventually crash the pocket to get fights to the ground. But if he's unable to get opponents to the ground, that's when things start to get shaky for him as he starts to slow down and starts questioning himself in terms of his effectiveness, in terms of winning fights. And that's what he could expect here with Kai Kamaka, who has shown some decent takedown defense throughout his career. And with his ability to keep this fight upright, I think he clearly has a striking advantage here. I think he has good enough durability to eat some big shots from Jenkins early in this fight. But Jenkins has chances to really grind and wear on Kamaka, whether it's up against the cage or keeping him stuck on the mat up against the cage, as he has done against prior opponents like Chris Wade. But I do like the underdog's shot here on Kai Kamaka, as I think that his takedown defense is good enough and his striking is good enough to really touch up Bubba Jenkins on the feet. What's wild, though, considering the 12 victories that Kamaka has on his record, he has no standing knockouts on his record. He only has one finish by knockout, and it came on the ground when he was able to overwhelm his opponent, Kevin Boom, on the ground and finish him with ground and pound. But in terms of being a striker, he's mainly a guy that goes out there and touches his opponents up with combinations, with precision, but not a whole ton of power. And that's kind of my pause here in terms of, even if he is able to stuff the takedowns of Jenkins, in the second and third rounds, will Jenkins's takedowns and control time actually nullify any type of damage that, or lack thereof, that Kamaka is able to accrue on the feet? So that's what gives me some pause here, but I still like the takedown defense we've been seeing from Kamaka and the clear striking advantage he'll have here over Jenkins. And as an underdog, I think it's worth a shot here. So I'm going to go Kamaka and Kamaka by decision. All right, next up, we have a rematch here from a Bellator fight between Yamauchi, who comes in at minus 240. He goes up against Naaman Gracie, who comes in at plus 205. Now, these two met about 2 years ago, and Yamauchi absolutely touched up Naaman Gracie on the feet, dropping him in the first round, then eventually finishing him in the second round, showcasing that he is the superior striker, even though a lot of people have known Yamauchi to be a grappler with 9 submissions throughout his Bellator career. This guy fights from a bit of a striking style and utilizes speed and straight shots down the pipe to hurt his opponents, which is what allowed him to defeat Naaman Gracie, who still seems to be questioning himself in that striking realm. Now, Yamauchi is coming off of that devastating and weird kneecap shattering injury he suffered at the hands of Michael Page last year, whereas Naaman Gracie is also coming off an extended layoff as well, as he last time was able to outgrind Dante Shiro over 15 minutes and get that victory. But we've seen Naaman Gracie, when he's unable to get his wrestling down, or we know his wrestling's not that great. His BJJ is very respectable, but he needs to present very weird and awkward moments for him to get some control in that grappling range, especially if his opponents have good enough takedown defense. Like the Dante Shiro fight, we saw him hop on the back in the clinch position, and that allowed him to secure a couple rounds just riding the back of Shiro, even though he didn't get the finish there. But Yamauchi has solid footwork, which made it very difficult for Gracie to get any sort of clinch situation going. And even when they did get postured up in the clinch in open space, we saw Yamauchi really start to batter Gracie with some solid knees and uppercuts up the middle. And I think that we'll see the similar we'll see a similar outcome this time. We might see Gracie be a little bit more desperate in terms of shooting takedowns, but I think the constant movement, lateral movement of Yamauchi will cause Gracie a lot of issues in terms of completing any sort of takedown. And even if this fight does end up hitting the mat early, Yamauchi is a solid black belt himself, so I don't think he'll find himself in a position that Gracie will be able to finish him. And I think that we end up seeing Yamauchi kind of doing the same thing in their first fight, keeping this fight upright, touching up Naaman Gracie, and potentially finding a finish. By the way, if you haven't seen the Yamauchi and Gracie finish, definitely worth checking out. Probably one of the crazier Super Saiyan moments that we've ever seen, where Gracie lands a couple jabs and Yamauchi starts pretty much hitting his forehead into the jab of Gracie and then like just flexing on him with his hands down and then eventually uncorking a beautiful uppercut that just crumpled Naaman Gracie. Beautiful work from Yamauchi there. But I like Yamauchi in this spot. I think he's worth a chalk in this spot. Gracie really needs to get this fight to the ground to have any success. Yamauchi is the better striker. His jiu-jitsu is good enough to deal with Naaman's jiu-jitsu, but I fully expect this fight to play out similarly to the first one, with Yamauchi eventually finding a knockout. All right, next up we got Gabriel Alves Braga coming in at -180, going up against Justin Gonzales, who comes in at +155. Now, Alves Braga was actually scheduled to fight Patricio Pitbull back in February at the PFL versus Bellator card, but I believe he failed to make weight or was unable to make weight, and that is also a fight in which he took on short notice. If I'm not mistaken, he was scheduled to fight somebody else and then ended up switching over to Pitbull, but also dealt with some family tragedy earlier this year, as his father was mistakenly, if I'm not, I believe I'm correct here, was mistakenly murdered by some Brazilian gangsters or mafia. And that happened back in January. But Braga didn't pull out of the fight that he had originally scheduled for that night. So I think he was supposed to fight not Jesus Pinedo, somebody else. Aaron Pico. He was scheduled to fight Aaron Pico, but didn't pull out of the fight. Pico eventually got set up with somebody else. I believe it was Henry Corrales. And then Braga got sent up to fight Pitbull, but that fight never ended up happening. Braga was one of my dark horses to win the tournament last year, and he actually made it to the finals, rematching Jesus Pinedo, who he defeated during the season, but then ended up coming up short in the finals as Pinedo was starting to run away with that fight and then eventually found a finish, I believe, in the third round. Braga, very solid striker, very technical, has a nasty calf kick, and has some good offensive grappling as well if that's something that he chooses to lean on. I think he's still a very talented fighter and has a very bright future. He just needs to get back into the win column and start building some momentum again. The fact that he is willing to fight shows that he's using the death of his father as motivation and as to go out there and fight in his honor, as his father was very closely tied to his fighting career, as I think he was pretty much his head coach throughout his life. His father was also a fighter, and Braga pretty much came up training in MMA since he was birthed. Very solid fighter, like I said, good jiu-jitsu, but I really think he is best when he's able to establish his striking. Now, his opponent, Justin Gonzales, is a solid fighter as well. Showcased some good takedown defense against Aaron Pico, but then we've seen him get grinded out by guys like Madge Burnell. Last time around, he came up short against Khizriev, I think it's Timur Khizriev, showcased good takedown defense in the second and third rounds, but was still muzzled by the offense and the threat of the takedown by Khizriev, which is why he was swept on the scorecards. Gonzales is a bit of a pot shotter with his striking, likes to wait for the opening with his jab and start to crash the pocket with that jab. Has a decent wrestling background of his own, which I wouldn't be surprised to see him try to pull out here against Braga. And he's very live to go out there and pull off an upset here against Braga. His losses are against high-level guys. He's he has solid fight IQ in my opinion as well, but I think he's going to end up coming up short against the better technical striking from the Braga side, especially with Braga's ability to really hammer that calf kick and really stay on it and just land his 1-2s down the pipe. Gonzales could make this close if he tries to implement his grappling, but I think that we've seen good enough defensive grappling and submissions off of Braga's back to showcase that he could nullify the amount of control time that Gonzales is able to accrue. But I still have some question marks here. Gonzales, tough threat in this weight class. Fully expect him to be very game, especially against a guy like Braga looking to get back into the win column. Given all of the out-of-cage things that Braga is going through, I have my question marks about him, but not enough to the point that I'm actually taking Gonzales at +155. So official prediction is going to be Braga and Braga by decision, but -180, a little bit wide for me to take a shot on him. All right, next up, we got Logan Storley coming in at -210, going up against Shamil Musaev coming in at +180. Now, we'll start off on the Storley side. We obviously know him for his patented wrestling background. Last time around, he was able to defeat Brennan Ward by taking him to the ground, putting him through the ringer for about 9 minutes before he was able to posture up and get a ground and pound victory in the second round. And his two losses have come to the same fighter. the former Bellator welterweight kingpin Yaroslav Amosov, who was able to stuff the takedowns and then beat him up on the feet. But Storley is very strong with his takedown entries, very smart with his entries. His striking is slowly improving, but it's really his ability to grind his opponents once he gets them to the mat that makes him so successful and so dangerous to deal with. His opponent this weekend, Shamil Musaev, is making his PFL debut here after knocking out Alexei Kunchenko back in July. Kunchenko, obviously former UFC fighter, but is a guy that is now 1-5 over his last 6 fights. But Musaev is a guy that loves striking, loves the spinning stuff. He's at a spinning back kick KO. He's at a spinning back fist KO. That's what it seems like he likes to rely on. Takedown defense, a little bit sketchy. I've seen when he really shows a little bit of urgency, he is able to work back to his feet, but I think that this is a fight that he's going to be pretty much stuck on his back against the superior wrestling of Logan Storley. Musaev should have a bit of a striking advantage, but I don't think it's so much so to the point that Storley is going to have issues in terms of dragging this fight to the ground. Musaev is a guy that hasn't been overly active. That win over Kunchenko was his first fight in 2 years, and now he's returning, about 9 months after that matchup as well. I think he's going to struggle to keep Storley off of him here. I think Storley won't have too much issues in terms of finding the entries to get this fight to the ground. And unless Musaev lands like a perfectly timed knee or a spinning back kick into a takedown attempt from Storley, I think he's going to struggle to keep this fight upright, which will allow Storley to grind this fight out. I don't think Musaev will get comfortable enough in the striking round to out-damage Storley on the feet should he work back to his feet. I think we'll see Storley keep on that cardio, keep on that pace, and keep on that grind, and keep Musaev in a defensive position for the majority of this matchup, winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, co-main event here. Former champion Brendan Loughnane coming in at -525, going up against Pedro Carvalho, who comes in at +400. Now, Loughnane was looking to go back-to-back last year. Started off the season pretty well with a nasty calf-kicking clinic against Marlon Moraes, and then he eventually ran into Jesus Pinedo, who eventually pulled off that huge upset, knocking Loughnane out 1.5 minutes into that matchup. Looking into that fight, you could see Loughnane getting frustrated due to the fact that Pinedo was not giving him an entry in terms of landing his calf kicks, consistently switching stances and utilizing his movement from long range, and Loughnane was just trying to calculate all of that movement, which eventually allowed Pinedo to land that beautiful knee up the middle that caused Loughnane to get rattled, and then he followed up with some big shots and got him out of there. But Loughnane is a solid fighter. He's a veteran. He's a guy that's going to be able to learn from that, come back stronger, and eventually get the W. We saw him deal with some adversity through his first couple of seasons with the PFL, but then you saw him improve his takedown defense enough in 2022 that he was able to stop the grapple-heavy approaches of his opponents and end up winning the PFL championship that time around. Now he's looking to get back to his winning ways, and I think the PFL has done a great job for him in terms of teeing him up against a very beatable opponent here. Pedro Carvalho, in my opinion, not that great of a fighter. BJJ black belt, if I'm not mistaken. It looks to get opponents to the ground where he can try to have success there. And then in the striking realm, he has good enough output to stay active against his opponents, but I think against more skilled strikers, he will end up coming up short. The biggest win that he's had, in my opinion, was that fight that he was able to defeat Madge Burnell, but still, this is still a stretch in which he is 2-5 over his last 7 fights. Not a great fighter, in my opinion. SPG product, but I think that connection to SPG is more so the reason for his popularity than his actual fighting skills. I think he's going to struggle here with the calf kicking of Loughnane. He'll be looking to take this fight to the ground, and that's going to cause him a lot of issues considering the takedown defense of Loughnane. And then, I think Loughnane pretty much touches up Carvalho here. Not too much to say about this one. I'd be surprised if this is a Jesus Pinedo type upset from Carvalho, but I think we see Loughnane touch him up. Excuse me. And then eventually find the finish in the second or third round by knockout. All right. Clearly the fight that I'm most excited about on this entire card, and it is perfectly positioned as the main event for this card. Andrei Koreshkov coming in at +115, going up against undefeated Magomed Umalatov, who comes in at -135. Now, Andrei Koreshkov is a veteran amongst veterans, right? It's crazy that he's only 32 33 years old, and has 32 professional fights under his belt already. Speaking of belts, former Bellator middleweight champion, welterweight champion. We've seen him defeat the likes of Douglas Lima. He was the guy, I believe, that welcomed Benson Henderson to the Bellator ranks and was able to easily defeat him there. And now he's currently riding a 5-fight winning streak, with his most recent victory coming as a revenge spot, as he was able to grind out Lorenz Larkin in a very close fight. Koreshkov has some flashy striking, likes the spinning stuff, learning from his mentor Alexander Shlemenko, but he is most effective when he's able to get opponents to the ground. The issue once fights hit the ground is that he's not the best in terms of dishing out damage, especially against guys that do not want to settle for that bad position and eventually either work to a scrambling position or back to their feet where they're able to get off on their striking. But Koreshkov has some good striking. Like he has, they're not often in combinations, but they're fast and they're powerful and they close the distance pretty well. It's just when he deals with superior strikers like Lorenz Larkin, who was able to touch him up and could arguably have won that fight as well. His opponent this weekend, Magomed Umalatov, is 14-0, but I believe that this is a huge step up for him in competition, going up against somebody as experienced as tenured as Andrei Koreshkov. Umalatov, we know him at his best, grinding grappling pace, does a great job in terms of posturing up from that top position, laying the smackdown on his opponents with ground and pound, or even at least sinking into submission and getting them out of there. But what was most impressive to me was his last fight against Naib Lopez, a fight in which he almost had Lopez out of there in the first round, had him on the ropes, probably a 10-7 round if I'm being honest, but showcased that even after chasing the finish as much as he did in that first round, still had the gas tank and wherewithal to win the next 2 rounds and still win that fight on the scorecards. Very solid fighter all around, showcases great wrestling, very solid striking, even as he showed in the Delano Taylor fight where he knocked him out in about a minute or so. Very solid fighter, American top team. But the thing for me here, and which is why I'm not going to bet him at -135, is the big step up in competition. I don't doubt that Umalatov is very skilled and a very solid opponent, but to fade a fighter of Andrei Koreshkov's experience and status with a fighter that is still trying to make a name for himself. I don't care that he's undefeated, and some of the fighters that he's defeated in the PFL, Koreshkov is easily the toughest opponent that he's faced to date. So I can't justify betting him as the favorite in this spot, but I think he ends up winning this fight. I think his cardio is better. I think he's going to be able to keep Koreshkov working for the majority of this matchup, and I think that there is a possibility that he can find a knockout if he can get wear on Koreshkov enough throughout the first round and a half or so, and maybe even open up a knockout in the third round as Koreshkov starts to slow down and maybe starts shooting some desperation takedowns. If Umalatov can continue to make him work, finishing him late is not out of the realm of possibility. My official prediction is going to be him by prediction, Umalatov by decision, but that KO prop is definitely worth a little bit of a sprinkle here if you think he's going to defeat Koreshkov. But close fight. This will tell us a lot about Umalatov. I hope this goes into the second and third round so that we can see what he's really made of. But I think he's a bright prospect, and I think he wins this matchup. Official prediction by decision, but going to be sprinkling the KO prop, as I think that's definitely going to be live in this fight. So there you guys go. Umalatov by decision to cap off PFL 3. There you guys go. Full breakdown for the PFL 3 card. Again, I will have ACA breakdowns on the Patreon page, the Lock of the Night Patreon page. And then we also have Octagon and Cage Warriors on Saturday. One of those I will be doing a Lock of the Night bonus episode dropping on Friday afternoon. You can vote in the comment section below which card you would like to hear me break down. And then the other one you can obviously find on the Lock of the Night Patreon page in written form. Otherwise, we are back to the UFC action next week with Alex Perez taking on Matthias Nicolau in a UFC Vegas card going down at the Apex as it starts off. I believe 5 or 6 straight weekends of UFC events. Not as long as the previous streak that we had, where it was 13 straight events. So just getting back into the swing of things there. All right. Appreciate all the love. Appreciate all the support. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for the regional bonus breakdown. See you guys then. Peace.